Hello, everyone, and good morning. Happy Tuesday, June 11th. We are so proud that you could join us today for this important CDM Agency Dashboard training event. This morning, the CDM training team is pleased to present to you the 4-hour course with hands-on labs, CDM 203, the role of the System Security Analyst with the CDM Agency Dashboard. My name is Joe Bukovac, and I am part of the CISA Cybersecurity Division and Education and Training Branch as the CDM Dashboard Training Team Lead. Today, the training goal is to provide you with the basics of CDM and discuss the role of the System Security Analyst. Throughout the course, you'll be provided with numerous CDM resources, references, and lab scenarios so you can maintain your skills in this changing environment. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce today's instructors and then share some disclaimers. Today, we have Adrian and John as our instructors. Adrian Shepard has 18 years of experience in the cybersecurity field, including 6 years supporting CDM. For 16 years, he has supported the DoD community and United States government's efforts in cyber defense. These efforts include security control assessments, training and courseware material, range operations, and exercise development. Adrian has served in the United States Air Force and is a retired cyber protection team member. John Stufflebeam has 15 years of experience in cybersecurity course development and instruction. John has supported the DHS, CISA, and CDM training program for more than 6 years. John served in the United States Navy, where he performed systems integration and combat information center tactical team training. Now, a few disclaimers before we get started. Today's course is being recorded live through WebEx. There is no dial-in for this session, and audio is in listen-only mode. CISA and DHS does not endorse, recommend, or favor any commercial product or service mentioned during this session. The use case data in our demonstrations and labs is simulated, and no production data is used for demonstration and training purposes. Additionally, please note the following sensitive information disclaimer. Be aware that this CDM Agency Dashboard training event is live and is being recorded and may be made public for the benefit of other students. Events such as these are attended by people from many different federal agencies. As a student, please do not disclose that any agency-sensitive information or personally identifiable information in chat during this event. Speaking of chat, CISA has a commenting policy addressing the rules of behavior regarding chat during virtual trainings. Everyone's input during the class discussion is fundamental in making the course a better learning experience for everyone. The CDM training team now provides 12 hands-on virtual courses, live in-person trainings in Arlington, Virginia, with the next in-person course scheduled next month. This is a back-to-back 4-day training. Registration is currently open if you'd like to attend. We also offer self-paced training options, along with new and updated microlearn videos, which are currently available on FedVTE. Just last week, we now have another location to view recordings of CDM trainings. They are now being posted on the CISA YouTube channel. Check it out. If you would like to know some more about our training membership list, if you'd like to be added to our training membership list, where you will be alerted of upcoming CDM training events, or if you have training related questions, please send us an email at cyberinsights@cisa.dhs.gov. At the conclusion of today's course, you'll be asked to answer a few survey questions, which will be in the learning environment. This is where you'll have the opportunity to provide your course feedback. We value your opinion, and your comments help to improve this and all the CDM dashboard courses we teach. Thanks again for attending. It is now time to grab a fresh cup of coffee or tea, sit back, and learn more about the role of the System Security Analyst with the CDM dashboard. And I would like to introduce Mr. John Stufflebeam, who will begin today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Joe, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're glad you could join us for a few hours this morning. So what I'd like to do to get started here is go over some WebEx functions. For those of you that may not be that familiar with WebEx, we like to go over these just so you have a lay of the land, so to speak. So the first thing we want you to be able to do is hear us. So if you look at the down arrow, there's some menu items there at the bottom of your screen, and you'll notice a mute button with a down arrow. If you click the down arrow, there's a panel that will pop up, and that will show you all of the audio options that you have available, either speakers or headset or whatever it is you're using for today. So just make sure that that's selected correctly. That should solve any of your audio issues. If you look to the right, there's an ellipsis button, and that is also another place where you can find some general WebEx settings as well as the audio. I think you can adjust your audio from there as well. If you look up in the upper right corner, you'll find a layout button. And if you give that a click, you can arrange the tiles around to suit you. There's also a full screen toggle button that you can use there if you need to go full screen to see something a little better. And then also in the upper right is a plus and minus icon, and you can use those to zoom in and out if if you need to zoom in and out on something. Now, again, going back to that menu bar there at the bottom, there is a little hand icon and a little smiley icon. And one is the raise hand icon, which you might have guessed. And all you have to do is click it to raise your hand and click it again to lower your hand. But I will warn you, the instructors really love the reactions. So if you click the smiley face, there's a number of little emojis that will pop up. And so we may tell you, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or show us the party horn or something like that. Yes, there we go. Thank you, Deborah. I think those are a lot more fun than raising your hand, just in my opinion. So that's where you will find them. Just click the smiley face and then make your selection. If you go over to the bottom, very right bottom corner, you'll find an icon for participants and also chat. And the participants will show you the training team listed there. You can see the training team, and it will also show you the number of attendees. Now the chat panel, we recommend that you keep that on top of everything. You can pop that out and move it around to different screen if if that's more convenient, but we recommend that you keep that on top so that you can see questions and answer questions from the instructors. If you have a question, as we go through the material today, please put it in the chat and address it to everyone. That way, one of the training team members can grab it and answer that for you. Adrian and I don't always see the chat when we're training, so please address it to everyone. In the very, very bottom right-hand corner, you'll notice an ellipsis. And if you give that a click, you'll find the closed caption option, which is a multimedia viewer. I think if you give that a click, it will pop up a panel, and you can just click through. There's some options there. I think you just click through them, and that will show you the closed captioning. On the very left-hand bottom, you'll also see a small icon for closed captioning. You can use that one as well, so whatever one you prefer. Okay, I think that is it for WebEx. And as Joe mentioned, at the end of the course today, you're going to have an opportunity to provide us some feedback, and we'll show you where to do all of that here a little later in the session. And then once you complete your survey, be sure to download your certificate so you get credit for today. All right. What are we here to do today? So first of all, this course is it's designed to address the security analyst role and what they might be reviewing on, say, a daily, a weekly, monthly, annual basis, and as well as some scenarios that they may be faced with solving. And then first, we'll take a look at the security analyst role itself, a little bit about who they are and what they do. and who might be performing that role at your agency. And then next, we'll discuss the importance of availability, integrity, and confidentiality, or if you can remember it as CIA, that's just as good. This is really, these three concepts are really the cornerstone of any security related activity. So we're going to get a little bit in depth with that here coming up. And we'll also cover some of the analyst key responsibilities. There's 6 of those, in addition to the importance of analysis and reporting. And then we'll touch briefly on aware scoring before going into continuous monitoring and methodologies. We normally don't cover too much about aware scoring in this course, but we do have a vulnerability course that you can register for that goes much more in depth with the aware scoring. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about addressing security issues. And of course, we have some lab activities for you today. And we'll be addressing those as we go through the material. So that way you get a chance to get your hands dirty and get some practice with the dashboard, particularly if you're not that familiar with it. I think it's a great opportunity. So that's what we're up for today. And at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian to get us started with some acronyms. So Adrian, over to you.
Thank you, John. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning for this course. So as John mentioned, I'm going to briefly just cover some of the acronyms that we will be discussing in today's course. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but in the event that you're new to CDM, these may be, we've referred to these ones as some of the more common acronyms that you'll see throughout today's presentation. The first is ISCM. And so that stands for Information Security Continuous Monitoring. And that maintains an ongoing awareness of information security, vulnerabilities, and threats to support organizational risk. Next, underneath there, we have a system boundary, which we refer to as SB, and it essentially identifies all the components of an information system and also determines where one system ends and another begins. Next, we have STIGs, and so these are provided by Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA, and they provide guidance on implementing a baseline of security controls for specific hardware devices. And I'm just going to stop a moment because I see a few individuals having issues with seeing the slides. And let's see here, you should see an acronym slides at the moment. Okay, so someone from our staff should be able to assist you. But one thing we do recommend is if you have the opportunity to download the app and use the app versus using the browser, that may be might be another opportunity for you to view this course. I know we've had a few isolated incidences where people have used the browser and they weren't able to see the slides, but you should see an acronym slide being viewed right now or being shared. All right, I'm going to continue on. Like I said, if you have any issues, we'll address those. One of my colleagues will be able to assist you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I know there's more acronyms on the slide, but I won't read through all of these. But I do want to remind you that in the supplemental documents section, which you'll find as we go through the walkthrough of the CVLE, you'll find the acronyms and glossary document, which is quite comprehensive. And so it not only covers the ones you see here, but also many others specific to the dashboard and the CDM program. So I definitely recommend you download it. It's quite useful, particularly if you're just becoming familiar with the dashboard or even just familiar with the CDM program. All right, we reached the first topic of today. And so we're going to get started by having a look at the System Security Analyst overview, right? We get that background on what this individual is and some of the duties and roles. Now, as we all know, when we're talking about security, it's very important in today's age, right? With technology evolving, so does security. And so the System Security Analyst has never been more important in helping secure government systems. Now more than ever, agencies are under fire to protect their systems and sensitive data and to ensure its availability, integrity, and confidentiality. As John mentioned earlier, that CIA triad. The President's EO 14028 states that the federal government must lead by example and that the administration doesn't believe that incremental improvements will provide adequate security. Rather, the federal government needs to make changes that utilize the full scope of its authorities and resources, regardless of the type of systems being protected. The system security analyst plays a key role in ensuring this happens. In this special publication, 800-181 Rev 1 outlines the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, or NICE framework, and provides a set of building blocks that describes tasks, knowledge, and skills that are needed to perform cybersecurity work by individuals and teams. So that provides that framework. And so what you're seeing here on the slide are some of the key elements for the system security analyst role as defined by that framework, the NICE framework. The official job description for the analyst includes applying cybersecurity principles, so things like least privilege or even configuration management, for example, and then making those principles match with agency policies or even other specific requirements, and then recognizing security vulnerabilities by monitoring and managing systems. And so then finally, and probably the most important, is once again ensuring availability, integrity, and confidentiality of those systems. So that's a quick outline regarding the guidance and the framework. But what I want to do now is hand it back to John to tell us about who the system analyst is.
All right, thank you, Adrian. And so let's find out here, who is a system security analyst? So let me ask the first question of the morning, and you can give me a thumbs up. Who performs, or do you know who performs the security analyst role at your agency? Just give me a thumbs up if you know who performs the role of security analyst at your agency. If you don't know, give me a thumbs down, actually. So we'll include that as well. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jason. Okay. All right. So most of you know who it is. That's good. Now, this role is going to vary from agency to agency, and it could have multiple titles. Could also involve anyone from the IT staff, management, or a special agency designate even. And in some cases, the role is a collateral duty, and it's performed as part of the individual's job description. I know with my time at Department of State, it took me a while to figure out who the ISSO was for our branch, because they have a collateral duty and they don't, it's not necessarily a thing that they do every day. So, if you don't know who it is, ask around and find out. All right, next question, and you can answer me in the chat pod. What is the title of your agency's security analyst role? What is the title of your agency's security analyst role? Okay, ISSO, all right. Senior Cybersecurity Analyst, ISSO. Okay, Cyber Specialist or ISSO. Okay. All right, very good. Thank you for that. As I mentioned, it can be, there can be a number of different titles for it. And again, as I mentioned, my time at Department of State, I think the Information Systems Security Officer, ISSO position really closely aligns with the role that we're talking about here today. So, just know that many agencies call it something other than security analyst. Could be anything. But as we proceed, be thinking about how this role aligns with your agency security processes. Okay, permissions and training. This is really, you may not think about this really, but it's a pretty important piece to this role because it's a necessary component, particularly because they have some sort of, administrative capability, or they have a need for administrative capability. And you also, need to request other appropriate access to monitoring tools and programs, depending on what those are, or other unique account access that's created specifically for the role. And then next, does the access extend only to a specific system? In some cases, the ISSO is assigned to a specific system, versus a more broad role as a security professional. Okay, and are there any special qualifications or training that's required for that system? Do they need to know how it runs and what it does? Okay. You'll also want to familiarize yourself with any specific monitoring and reporting policies at your agency. Okay. So those are all part of the training and permissions piece. So let's take a look now. We've mentioned confidentiality, availability, and integrity a couple of times now. So since it's a core function of any security analyst role and the cornerstone of information security in general, because we're always protecting something, we're making it available, and we're ensuring that the data is correct, right? So with that said, I want to take a few minutes to cover this in a little more depth. And while it, may be the duty of the security analyst to ensure CIA, it is up to all users to be vigilant and to use systems and information responsibly and to adhere to their organization's security policies. So that said, I have a little exercise. You're going to help me fill out a table, and I'll ask the question and you reply in the chat pod, and I'll record your answers, and when we're finished, we'll take a look at the results. So I think Adrian's going to help me out with this. So let me go ahead and share out my screen here, and we'll get started. Find the right place to go. There we are. Okay. All right, so the first question: what are some things that your agency does to ensure confidentiality of systems and information? And Adrian, if you could read off the answers as they come in, I'd appreciate it.
No worries. So we have full disk encryption,
Okay.
RBAC, encryption email or encrypted email,
Okay. Okay.
and then someone else also expressed encryption in transit and DAR, or data at rest. So I don't know if you want to keep that at that level.
Okay. Sure.
Let's see, hashing tokens,
Oh, there we go.
PIV,
PIV. All right. Very good. Anything else?
going once, going twice.
All right.
Let's see, one
We're off
last
to a good.
one, access
Okay.
management.
Ah.
Looks like we have one more. Least privilege principle, and I guess that's it.
I can't spell this morning apparently. So, all right. Well, we'll leave it there. Okay. Next question. What are some things that your agency does to ensure integrity of systems and information? Integrity.
Okay, we have two-factor authentication.
So that would be MFA, I guess. Okay.
Yes. Let's see, PIV, non-repudiation.
Okay.
Let's see, certificates and digital signatures.
Okay.
Data input validation.
All right.
Checksums. We have change management.
Ah, there's a good one.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Separation of duties.
All right.
Let's see here. We have, oh, okay, we have some integrity monitoring software. Integrity checking. Yeah, I'll take a couple more here. Let's see. We want to take one more. Oh, we have code signing.
I think that's right. Code signing.
Yeah, you got it. Good job.
Okay.
Let's see. Uh, let's see if you want one more. Let's see. I'll do. Someone mentioned regular backups.
Okay. Perfect. Sounds like we have a technical group here today. Lots of technical answers here. All right, last question. What are some things that your agency does to ensure availability of systems and information?
And then they're off at the races. Load balancing,
Okay.
disaster recovery, let's see, clustering,
Interesting. Okay.
need to know,
Okay.
let's see, redundant systems,
Okay.
COOP, contingency of operations planning, DDoS protection. When we have hot, warm sites,
Yeah, what do we call that? The term is escaping me, but I know what you mean. Okay.
let's see, IPS.
All right, one more if we have it.
Yes. Pick. I'll pick patching and updates.
All right. Excellent. Wow, a lot of technical responses here. Let me make some room here real quick. Okay. So if you take a look at all these responses here, would you say that you could switch around a few things and probably put a few of these answers in all three columns? And probably the answer is yes, particularly, redundancy maybe, encryption. Um, I like patching might be able to go under integrity as well. Okay, so the moral of the story here is that they're interrelated. Really, you need to have one in order to have the other. Okay, it's kind of like an old-fashioned table or something with with 3 legs. If you take away a leg, is it still a table? Well, maybe, but it doesn't work very well. Okay, so just keep in mind that these are interrelated. And one thing, or a couple of things actually, well, we touched on one. I'm going to say documentation. Okay, we touched on COOP and hot warm sites and that kind of things, but documenting, apparently I can't spell that today either, but documentation and also training. We didn't mention training at all, but I would say those 2 items could probably go in all 3 columns as well. Document what you do and have have a backup and a plan in place, a disaster recovery plan. I think we mentioned that here somewhere, yeah, disaster recovery. And then train your users on what to do and how to do it. Okay. So, all right. So interrelated, and just keep that in mind, that everything regarding confidentiality, integrity, and availability really relies on each other across the board. So. All right, let me go ahead and get back to our screen here. And let's take a look here at some key responsibilities. So with that, I'm going to let Adrian get us started on some of the key responsibilities of the security analyst. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. All right. So there are 6 fundamental responsibilities of the system security analyst. And the first being operations and maintenance, or O&M. And often O&M starts out as policies, sometimes referred to as administrative controls. These policies are not necessarily technical or technology based or even solution dependent, but convey a desired state that needs to be achieved. Next, we have when we talk about operational procedures. They refer to operational activities such as physical security, scheduling, and then any processes as well. These are going to be specific to each agency. And then finally, there are technical procedures. These are the technical security solutions, items like hardware configurations, backup solutions, workstation baseline configurations, patch applications, many of the things we talked about in the CIA exercise. And so these are all examples of technical procedures. And then you have good old-fashioned problem solving. Is also a part of operations and maintenance, regardless of the procedure or policy. Because as with any system, there are always discrepancies that arise, right? We wish we could roll out a solution and never have to worry about it again, but we know there's going to be issues. Other O&M activities might include things like specific organizational requirements. Specific monitoring might include things like high-value assets or HVAs, or reviewing classified systems, managing security assessments, or creating and disseminating information for federal reporting requirements. Now on the slide, the title there says continuous monitoring. And I would ask, pose a question to the group, and you can respond in the chat pod. Why do we do continuous monitoring? Why do you feel that that would be important? Well, let's take an example of this course. Technology aside, why would we want to monitor our chat panel? Because there's going to be information being fed to us, right? There's continually updates, right? Information is coming across, so we want to monitor the chat panel. The same thing can be said for the term or the phrase continuous monitoring, right? The environment is ever changing. Thank you for the individual that mentioned that. Yes, it is. It's whatever was yesterday. We've known with technology, and threats are never ending. There we go. They're coming in now. You're all correct. The key to what you're saying is changes. right? Nothing remains the same. And so you're all right. And so the second fundamental responsibility is continuous monitoring. And so this means ensuring security controls remain effective over time. The slide shows a list, or at least a small list, of some continuous monitoring activities, which we've talked about throughout this course already. And so, like earlier in that AIC exercise, the items listed here aren't exclusively technical or operational. In most cases, they will cross the line depending on policy and or system requirements. Let's see, we have patching. Patch management is essential to effective system maintenance. In some larger agencies, patch management is centralized and patches are pushed at designated times. Maybe at your agency, you have, Patch Wednesday or something, or, what we refer to in the industry as Patch Tuesday when new updates are released. You need to patch them, your systems, because you're vulnerable due to, they've realized there were vulnerabilities operating in the wild. Now, however, when we talk about centralized patching, centralized patching doesn't negate the need for local testing. You still need to be able to roll out some type of test bed to test these patches. You don't just say, okay, there's a new patch and then roll it out and then realize that you just broke your infrastructure because of this new patch. And so the best practice is to validate that all patches have been successfully tested and applied within a specified time frame according to your agency policy. And so whether that's 1 week, 1 month, a few months, whatever that time period to make leadership have a warm fuzzy to feel like, okay, if we roll out this patch, there's a low level of risk. Next, we have backups. And so backups, do you have a backup plan? You need to be able to describe the what, the when, and how your backup plan, of what your backup plan is. And so even if your backups are handled offsite or by a cloud provider, there still needs to be a local backup plan in place. Backup logs should be reviewed frequently to ensure the backups are actually successful and that the data being backup is actually what's intended. And so you want to have somebody checking those backups and making sure that even though, yep, we did it, we've done our weekly backup, we're good. You check the box, but have you verified the data? Can this data be backed up in the event of a ransomware attack? Are you able to recall that data and be able to utilize that? And then from what point can you back up to? So very important. System access. And so system access maintenance is certainly a continuous monitoring activity. User accounts and system accesses are ever changing and need consistent and continual review. The process for account maintenance will vary depending on your agency policy, but one of the best practices is to ensure user accounts are disabled after a determined period of inactivity. And so when we're talking about this, maybe you're an agency that you have a lot of people visiting, or, in the military, we use the term temporary duty or TDY to a different site. And so you give these visitors access for whatever time period they're here. Well, does anybody go back and verify that they no longer have that access, those privileges onto the network? Is there some type of system that reports out, hey, this inactivity of these accounts for the last 6 months? Do we need to deactivate them? Hey, who's their supervisor? We need to send a message out to them and see if maybe there's something, things happen. There's an error in the process, and we need to make sure, hey, if they do need access, we need to verify that. And so you want to verify the system access. And then training. We all love training, right? That's why you're here today. And so annual security awareness training is commonplace across agencies, and there should be some accountability mechanism for those that do not complete it. It's difficult at best to effect good cyber practices without some behavior modification on the part of the user. And so do you deactivate their account? Or do you just give them access to, as soon as they log in, they have to go directly to the training? They can't get onto the web or anything else that redirects them to the training. And then they have, from that deadline, maybe a week, depending on what type of training it is, or maybe even a month. Next we have is configuration management, and it's another continuous monitoring activity. System configurations need to be reviewed at least annually or when there is a significant change to the system. Not all activities are technical regarding configuration management. For example, we may have an accurate system documentation, and configurations logs should be maintained to reflect current and prior configuration baselines. So a good practice is to have a control or change control board, or CCB, in order to monitor and approve or disapprove changes to systems. And so you want to have the system owners involved in that process, and then whatever stakeholders, to make sure that the time that you're making this change, it's not going to affect their operation. So maybe you have to do it in off-duty time, so overnight or early in the morning, late at night, those kind of things to implement those changes if it gets approved through the CCB. Last thing I'll talk about is inventory of HWAM and SWAM. And when we're talking about HWAM and SWAM, we're talking about hardware access management and software access management. And so as a best practice, hardware needs to be inventoried as part of a system. And when we're here today to learn about the dashboard. So with regards to the dashboard, every hardware asset should be associated with the system boundary. And so in the case of, like I said, the dashboard or the agency dashboard, system boundaries should already be in place as determined by your agency. All the analyst needs to do is ensure that the hardware is designated as system boundary and accounted for under some sort of management authority. All right. Guess what I'll do is go ahead and turn things back over to John to talk a little bit about vulnerability management.
All right, thank you, Adrian. So let's take a look now at vulnerability management. And this is the third fundamental activity. And here you see a basic list. It's not all inclusive, of course, but it's activities that are related to vulnerability management. And the first one I want to mention is monitoring, which is managing any system vulnerability can be done through continuous monitoring. And continuous monitoring is performed by, among many other things, reviewing current vendor patch notifications and security configuration best practices, security architecture guidance, emerging threats and vulnerabilities, those sorts of things. So, and we talked about continuous monitoring a little bit ago. Keeping up on these things really goes a long way in your vulnerability management. All right, next is notification. When anomalies are identified on your system, who do you notify? What is your agency's policy and what's required when you find something that's, a little bit suspect or a lot suspect? Okay. Now, in some cases, there's a formal reporting process. Of course, that's going to be agency dependent, but typically, management is made aware and the analyst makes recommendations for remediation. Okay, so in cases where there's a federal directive, like an emergency directive or a binding operational directive, CISOs are required to acknowledge receipt of CISA emergency directives and then respond as outlined. And then, usually those types of directives have some sort of reporting requirement or notification requirement associated with them. All right, so next question here, give me a thumbs up. Do you have a notification process at your agency? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay. Excellent. Wow. Lots of thumbs up. Okay. Perfect. All right. If you don't have one, that's okay. Just find out more about it when you get back, to your agency and ask some questions and find out, what's going on. But having a good notification process is really, paramount in making sure, that your vulnerabilities are handled in a timely manner. So the next one is remediation, which is, as a best practice, when you report an anomaly, there should be a recommendation or a process on how to remediate the problem. Okay, now management or the system owner, whomever it is, needs to receive information that's actionable. Okay? So you want to include things like key findings, recommended actions, estimated costs if that's applicable, and also if there's any associated risks. Okay, and if it's determined that no action needs to be taken or will be taken, then document that decision. Okay, There could be, there could also be an approved waiver process that will document that decision as well. Okay, one last question here. Give me a party horn if you have a remediation process at your agency. Remediation process. Okay. And the party horns are coming in here. Excellent. Because it's a party, right, to remediate your vulnerabilities. I can only imagine. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. Let's take a look at tracking and managing assets. And this is the fourth fundamental responsibility of the security analyst. And hardware asset management, or HWAM, you need to know what's on your network before you can effectively determine your risk. You can't secure what you don't know you have, right? So HWAM creates a foundation for other management activities like software asset management, configuration management, vulnerability management. All of these depend on the ability to establish and maintain an accurate hardware baseline. Now, much like HWAM addresses hardware, SWAM addresses software. Okay? And in order to have an effective SWAM program, you really first have to know what machines you have and where they are. So therefore, HWAM and SWAM really do go hand in hand. And SWAM is an integral part of the network, and it can track things like patching status and licensing. If you have an unauthorized machine or legacy software products that are out there that you may have forgotten about. And then, when you implement this effectively, it can have a real and positive effect on your user productivity. Okay. Now, configuration settings management, or CSM, collects information about how authorized hardware and software is configured in the operational environment. And then it compares that with the security-related specifications that are developed by the agency. And in the federal government, we often verify configurations using DISA-STIG compliance tools. Okay? And STIGs stand for Security Technical Implementation Guides. And they are the standard for Department of Defense information assurance. And they provide the technical guidance to secure information systems and software that might otherwise be vulnerable. And then lastly, another system component that is tracked is identity and access management, or the user. And just like you have to know what is on the network, you also have to know who is on your network. And you have to be able to trust them. You have to be able to give them enough access to do their job. Okay, we talked about least privilege during the exercise earlier. So that would be a least privilege, making sure that they have only enough to do what they need to do. And then we also need to be able to hold them accountable for their actions. Okay, and we also have to convey the expected behavior. Okay, so when they're using networks and information. Now, in the chat pod, you can answer this question for me. How does your agency convey expected user behavior? How does your agency convey expected user behavior? Agreement, let's see, user agreement signed each year. Okay, rules of behavior. All right, Deborah says rules of behavior. Nicole, rules of behavior. All right, what else? Anything else? Training. All right. Policy, rules of behavior, training that's done each year. Okay. Monthly newsletters. Oh, wow, interesting. Okay. User agreement and training. All right, I think everybody's probably familiar with user agreement and training, because we do that, once a year. I think every agency has some sort of cyber course that you have to take each year. I know I just finished mine the other day, as a matter of fact. So yeah, so I think that's true of most agencies. So, but as you can tell from the illustration here, trust, behave, priv, and cred are all integral to the identity and access management concept. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Adrian to tell us a little bit about high-value assets.
All right, so how many of you have heard the term high-value asset, or HVA? And you can either give me a thumbs up or you can say yes in the chat. All right, quite a few. Well, great. So this may be just a refresher for you, for those who haven't heard of the term or the phrase before. I feel like it's important, since we're discussing assets, right? We should take a quick look at them and just kind of make sure we have an overall understanding of what their intention is, and why we need to protect them. And so, an HVA is a system, endpoint, or information that is critical to mission operations, right? And so a system or endpoint is considered an HVA if the loss or corruption of information or an information system or loss of access would have serious impact to the organization or national security. Another caveat is it can be considered an HVA if it is essential for organizations to maintain the security and resilience of the federal civilian enterprise, or if the information or information system that processes, stores, or transmits the information is of high value to the government or its adversaries. And so those are the categories that identify if an endpoint or system should be considered an HVA. Now, essentially, the definition of an HVA was expanded from a single definition to these multiple categories, which is shown on your slide, to have greater flexibility. And so while agencies are principally responsible for designating their HVAs, OMB and DHS may also designate HVAs at agencies based on potential impact to national security. Now, next, we're going to talk about some of the mandates and policies that are provided, that have been delivered or developed in regards to HVAs. And so within the HVA program, there are a few mandates or federal policies which help shape and prioritize the security of HVAs in the federal enterprise. The top, we have M-21-31. And so HVA logging compliance activities are prioritized in OMB M-21-31. And then going down the list here, we have Binding Operational Directive, or BOD 18-02, and that mandates the execution of the HVA program by requiring the identification and prioritization of HVAs across the federal government. We have OMB M-19-03, and this enhanced the HVA program by improving the designation of HVAs, and it defined HVA reporting, assessments, and remediation requirements. And then lastly, here we have HVA Supplemental Guidance 3.0, which provides agencies with the details necessary to comply with the following policy mandates. And so those mandates are types and frequency of HVA assessments, reporting requirements for third-party HVA assessments, and reporting requirements for HVA remediation plans. All right, and so if applicable, modernization plans as well. All right, so that's, like I said, a quick down and dirty of HVA and some of the policies that are behind that program. What I'm going to do now is turn it back over to John to get us started with the first lab of today, because I know everyone's ready to get their hands onto the dashboard.
All right. I believe they probably are. So let's take a look here. All right, so we've come up to the first lab of the day, and what I want to do is give everybody a little brief overview of how to reach the CBLE for those of you that may not have joined the tech check yesterday. We'll just do a quick review of that, and then I want to go through the first lab with you, just so we are all on the same sheet of music and you get an idea of how these are laid out. So bear with me here for just a second, and let me get my screen shared out. And let's see here. Log out of this. Okay, let's see. All right. So once you get logged into the CBLE, okay, you should have put in your user ID and password, or if you are a DHS smart card holder, you could use your PIV card to log in. But either way, it's going to prompt you for a 6-digit code, and then once you enter that, it'll bring you to this page that you see here, and it'll have your name at the top with a welcome. Okay, you're going to want to click on CDM 203 Systems Analyst if you haven't already. Okay, and that brings you to the course page. Here you're going to find your slides and your lab guides. So if you haven't downloaded your lab guides yet, please do that now so that we can get started here on time. So just download those. The supplemental resources, Adrian mentioned that earlier. Here's the supplemental resources file. There's some great documentation in there, so take a look at that when you get a chance. And take with you whatever you may want from there. I'm going to skip student range for just a second and show you where the feedback survey is. So the feedback survey is at the very bottom of the course page. And what you'll do is you'll just click feedback survey, answer the questions, and then once you're finished, be sure to download your course certificate. Okay, so that's where you'll go for that. Now, back to student range. This is how you access the CDM training dashboard. So we're going to click student range here next to the little icon. All right, and that brings up this page, which is launch in range. And if you'll notice, there's some credentials down here in the lower left. We've got username and password. Username is Elastic, password is password with a capital P. Okay, so I'm going to launch in range. And that should bring you to a login page, okay, that looks like this. And you're going to type in those credentials. And they are case sensitive, so be sure to type Elastic in all lowercase. And password with a capital P. So it should look like this. Then you're going to log in. And that's going to bring you to the select your space. And for this first lab, we're going to select Agency Dashboard, which if you're looking at the lab, you'll see that that is step 2 here in the lab, step action number 2. Now, a couple of things important, so please give me a second here. It's the date range. So if you notice, it defaults to last 30 days up here in the upper right corner. And there's a little calendar icon with a down arrow. And if you give that a click, I want you to click last 1 year. Okay. And that's where your date range should be set for each of your labs today. So always check that. If you get a response that you don't expect, or no data shows up, or you know, something odd, check your date range. It's most likely not set to last 1 year. And we have to do that because of our training data. We only ingested data a couple of times. At your agency, you ingest data on a regular basis. So you probably won't have to adjust your date like you are here, but always pay attention to your date range. Make sure you're in the proper date range. All right, so this is going to be using the Discover tool, but there's a little scenario here at the beginning. It says your manager is concerned that some high-value asset endpoints are not reporting when running inventory reports at facility 3. You're tasked with finding any endpoints that are inactive and are designated as a high-value asset. And then once you identify those, you're going to provide an easily readable recurring report. Okay, so that's where we're headed. So let's take a look now at step number 3. We're going to be using the Discover tool. So if you look up here in the upper left-hand corner, There's some three little dashes. We call them the pancakes or the hamburgers because we're pretty food oriented around here. So, but what you're going to do is give that a click, and that's going to open this drawer here from the left, and you're going to click on Discover. Okay, and that's going to bring you into the Discover tool. Now, once again, if you don't have any data showing, check your date up here in the upper right. Make sure it's set to last 1 year. Okay. The next step, it wants you to click New. Now, for this lab, it doesn't make much difference because we haven't done any work in here yet. But what that does is that clears out. I'll go ahead and click it so you can see. What that does is it clears out all of your prior queries, all of your prior filters, all of your prior attributes that you've selected to look at, and it lets you start fresh. So in the labs coming up, you're going to want to use that definitely. Okay. Now, number 5 says what we're going to do here is we're going to select the CDM HWAM current data view. And the way we do that is, if you notice here in the upper left, there's a little blue box. It says CDM star with a down arrow. And we're going to click the down arrow and we're going to find CDM HWAM current. Okay. And it should be in alphabetical order. And right here it is, CDM HWAM current. Now, if you don't find it, you can find a data view and you can just type in what you're looking for here and that will bring it up. That's another way you can do it. Okay, so we're going to select CDM HWAM current. And you notice how the number of hits changes and the attributes here on the left-hand side change as well. Okay, so these are all attributes associated with hardware. Okay, and again, they're in alphabetical order, so as you run across these attributes that you're going to need to select, you can look there, or you can search the field names. That's another great way to find what you're looking for. Okay, so and in fact, number 6 wants us to do that. So what we're doing here with the HWAM current, this is a data view, and it's think of it like an index, I guess. You're looking at all of the hardware information, basically, when you select this data view. Okay, so in this case, since we're looking for machines that aren't reporting, we're going to be looking for hardware, right? So this is called the document table here, this big area with all of this information. And you notice we have 8,859 hits. And all of those are listed here. So we could scroll through and look at each one if we wanted to. But we don't want to do that, trust me. Okay, so what we do want to do though is we want to select some attributes that we want to look at in step 6. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to select facility ID, okay, which is right here at the top. And I'll explain why it's at the top here, because it's if you notice it says popular fields, okay, and if I scroll down, this says available fields. Okay, we have 143 available fields for hardware management. Okay, there's 10 popular fields and we have 1 selected. Okay, so that gives you just a little information about what you're looking at. Okay, so the next thing we need to select is host ID. So we'll select host ID, and if you've been doing work before prior with some of these attributes, they float to this to the top, to this popular fields area, so that they're easier to find. And that's why we're able to just click on them now, is because they're in this popular fields area. All right, so the next one is host category, so we'll select that. Host status, which I think is down here, so we'll select that. Host type, hardware inventory update date, which is right here, and host high value asset. There it is. Okay, so they were all listed here. So that's good. That makes it easy for us. Okay. And now step 7, 8, and 9 want us to create a filter. So I'm going to show you how to do that here with the little plus icon, blue plus icon. Give that a click, and then you can add a filter. Okay. And the first thing we need to do is select a field, and it's telling us here that we are looking for facility ID. Okay, so we're going to select a field and we're going to type in facility ID. Or we can just type in the first few letters, and you notice when I type that, each of these items with FAC shows up in the list. Okay, so whatever the string is what will pop up. So we can select facility ID from the list. Okay, then we're going to say is for our operator, and you notice you have several different operators here, and I think you'll get a chance to use some of those throughout the labs. Okay, and then we're going to say over here select a value, we're going to say facility 3, and then we're going to add the filter, and notice what happens. Okay, we go from 8,800 to 1,700, almost 1,800. Okay, and the column is highlighted to let you know that you're filtering on that column. Okay, and if you notice right here in the upper left corner, you've got a facility ID filter set to facility 3. All right, so number 10 wants us to select the host category is endpoint and the host status is inactive. Okay, now I'm going to show you a little trick. Okay, and a shortcut, I should say it's a shortcut. Okay, now if we go to host category right here and we look, we have endpoint listed second in line here. Okay, and if you notice, there's a plus and a minus icon, and plus is filter for, minus is filter out. Okay, so if I click the plus, okay, it creates a filter, just like it's exactly like we just did with the plus sign here. It's just a little shortcut where you don't have to go through all those steps. Okay, and it sets the category to endpoint. Okay, and notice our hits now, we're down to 372. Okay, the next it wants us to set host status is inactive. So here's host status, and if we have inactive, there we go. We can use our shortcut. And there it's set to inactive. Okay, and then host high value asset in number 11 wants us to create a filter for host high value asset. And we can do that by coming up here and doing an add filter, or we can do that over here with host high value asset, just the last column. And actually, let me show you this too. Where is it? I wanted to, oh, there it is. Notice this little icon here on the very left-hand side. If you give that a click, it will collapse that left-hand column so that you have a little more real estate here on the screen. To get it back, you just click it again and it will come back. But I'm going to collapse it here for just a second so we can see a little better. So we have host high value asset. We need to set it to true. So what we can do is we can use our shortcut rather than do it the long way, because we have a value right here at the top. Okay. Now I say it's a shortcut because what you don't want to do is scroll and scroll and scroll looking for the proper value. Sometimes it's just quicker and easier to come up here, do the plus, create the filter, and be done. Okay. And I say that because it's the shortcut works great in our training environment, but at your agency where you may have hundreds of thousands of records, documents, it may not be as effective. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now step 13 wants you to save the report. So here's what I need you to do. I need you to go ahead and do a save. I'm not going to do it because, well, actually I can do it up to a point here, I think. I think I can do it up to this point. So step 13 says HVA's facility 3. Put your initials at the end of the report. That way you won't step on each other. We're all using the same image, so if you create a report with the same, all with the same name, you'll overwrite one another. So put your initials at the end or something to make it unique, and that way you can find it a little easier as well. Okay, so now once you have it saved, I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. Once you have it saved, you're going to click Share. Okay, and you're going to see that you have an option here to share using permalinks or CSV reports, or get links, which is actually permalinks, or CSV reports. And you're going to use CSV report. Okay, and if I click it, you can see it says generate CSV. Okay, so what you're going to do then is generate the CSV. Now I can't show you this because of the way my screen is shared, but now actually let me, yeah, no, I don't think it will show it. But go ahead and click Generate CSV, and at the bottom, you're going to see a pop-up that says Download Report. And you're going to want to download that report. And then when you open it, once it's finished, you can open it. It should send it to your local downloads. Okay, and once you finish, you can open it in Excel. It should open in Excel. And then at that point, you can use Excel functions to manipulate the data. Okay, now this is a great way to share the information with somebody who may not have access to the dashboard. Okay, if they have access to the dashboard, probably a link would be better because then they can work with it themselves. But if they don't, you can do a CSV file, generate CSV, and then pass that information along to whomever might be in need of it. Okay. Now steps 19 and 20 show you how to manipulate the data a little bit in Excel. You all are probably better Excel users than I am because I don't use it that often, but you get the idea here of how to manipulate the data. Okay. And that basically steps us through the first lab. So what I want to do now is go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing and get us back to the slide presentation here. There we go. What I'd like to do now is let's do 25 minutes on the clock, and that'll give you about 15 minutes to answer the knowledge check questions in the back of the lab. And what we'll do is we'll go through those here once you're finished. But there's also a 10 minutes built in there for a little break, so you can stretch your legs and get a fresh cup of coffee. I know we've been at this now over an hour, so let's put 25 minutes on the clock. And we'll do 15 minutes for the knowledge checks and 10 minutes for the break. Okay, so we'll see you back at 10:40. Right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a chance to make it through the lab and also grab a fresh cup of coffee. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the knowledge check answers. So I'll share out my screen here. All right. And this is what it looks like. This is based on the step actions that we went through a little bit ago. So let's take a look now at the knowledge check questions. And I noticed there was a question in the chat about where to record these, and you can just make a note of what you come up with. We don't track the answers or anything like that. There's nowhere to put the answers in the CBLE. So just keep track of what you come up with. And when we do the debrief, you can see how you did. Okay. All right. So let's take a look now. The first question says, using your Excel report, identify the servers with the oldest update date. All right. Hopefully you all had the ability to pull up the report and take a look at the Excel report. If you didn't, that's okay. I know, some of you might be more familiar with Excel than others, but anyway, if you have the report, okay, the only thing you needed to do was to sort the host hardware inventory update date from Z to A. I think it's Z to A in Excel for, what is it, ascending. So that should give you the oldest update date. I don't think there's too many items in that Excel sheet anyway, so should have been fairly easy. Okay, so all right, number 2. It says close the Excel spreadsheet, do not save it, so there's no need to save that. Okay, and return to the dashboard report in the Discover tool. It says modify the filter set and identify the number of HVA endpoints that have been updated between July 1st, 2023 and August 31st, 2023 at facility 0. All right, so let's take a look. Right now we're filtered on facility 3, right? So let's go take a look at our filter here. If you notice when I hover over it, it gives me the little hand icon. And if I click that, I get edit filter, temporarily disable filter. I can delete it altogether if I want to. I can, there's a couple of different things here that I can do. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit the filter. And we're going to say facility ID is facility 0. And we're just going to do the drop down arrow here. We're going to say facility 0. And we'll update the filter. So we'll get that out of the way first. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a filter for the date range that we're looking for. So unfortunately, there's no shortcut to do that. We have to come up here and do a filter. So I'm going to click Add Filter. And the field that we're going to select is going to be Hardware Inventory Update Date, or Host Hardware Inventory Update Date. Now that's a lot to remember, right? So I'm just going to type in a string from one of the keywords. I think inventory will do it. So if I type in inventory, there it is, host hardware inventory update date. Okay, and if you notice, the name of this has, we have host dot hardware underscore inventory underscore update date. Okay, so it's just easier than trying to remember the whole thing and whether there's a, is there a dot, is there an underscore? So just type in a part of the string and see what comes up. I find that to be the easiest thing to do. So, all right, we're going to select hardware inventory update date. Then we're going to say for our operator is between, okay, because we're looking for a date range. Okay, and the start of the range is going to be July 1st, so 07/01 2023 to August 31st, 08/31 2023. Now you can do 2023 07/01. You can mix it around if you want to. I always just do it in month, day, year, and it will take it just fine. Okay, so we're going to do an add filter. Okay, and notice that brings us down to 16 hits. So that's all we had to do now to determine how many endpoints have been updated during that time period. Okay. All right, so question number 3 says between July 1st, 2023 and August 31st, 2023, how many non-HVA endpoints are blocked or quarantined at facility 4? Okay, so let's kind of do what we did before. We're going to come over here. We're going to change facility ID. Going to edit that. We're going to say facility ID is facility 4. We'll update that filter. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to, it wants to know HVA, non-HVA endpoints. Okay, so right now we have high value assets set to true, right? So we're going to set high value asset. We'll do if edit filter is false. Okay. And so we have that set, and then we need to figure out what's been blocked or quarantined. So, and we have facility 4 already, so whatever is blocked and quarantined. So right now we have host status is inactive. Okay, we can see that that's selected here. So I'm going to do a edit filter. Host status is one of. Do the drop down, and we're going to say blocked and quarantined, and update the filter. Okay, and that's all we need to do. And you can see here that we now have all of the blocked and quarantined items listed, all the endpoints. Okay, all the non-HVA endpoints, I should say. So really, with just a few clicks, you can easily modify filters. You can easily create them. And that's what I really want you to take away, is not so much the fact that we ended up with 17 hits, because tomorrow, if we did this exercise, we might end up with a different number of hits, but the process would be the same. Okay, and that's what I want you to remember. All right, so let me go ahead and get us back to our slideshow here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian. We're going to cover the 5th fundamental responsibility of the system analyst. So Adrian, over to you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so as John mentioned, we're going to talk about the 5th fundamental responsibility, which is system security. And so what does that mean exactly? It's very vague, but as an analyst, as an analyst, you want to know your systems and how to respond to them. And so that's very important. And with that being said, the list that you see on the slide are some of the major protections. And so obviously, we all come from different agencies and systems differ in importance, but systems that support key tenets of the mission should be considered critical systems. Now, as we discussed, or as I discussed earlier, they may even be designated as HVAs. Next, you have to consider, is the data encrypted? I remember during the exercise earlier, we talked about encryption. I think that came across each one of those columns that we had for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so, is it encrypted? Is there a backup schedule? And what is that strategy? Regardless of the backup platform, a best practice is to have a backup or backup plan that covers the actions associated with your backup strategy. And then for identity and access management, how is your system access is secured, right? What is the review process? What is the request process? What are you using to secure them? These are the things that you just want to think about as you implement this new technology. From a security aspect, yeah, it's great to roll out these technologies, but now you have to think about how are they secured. Next, you want to ensure proper configuration of the system is paramount. You want to obviously in providing overall security. A good best practice is to have a baseline security template. I was actually speaking offline with another student regarding templates. And so you want to hopefully have something that's been vetted, and that no matter who that person is that's implementing, they have something to go off of. When I worked in the military and also I spent time as a contractor overseas, we had templates in place. That way, if we got new individuals into the work center, they would be able to operate off of that security template. We know this works in this environment, and so we need to continue to use this. It's been vetted. Don't just decide to go on a whim and say, hey, I'm going to implement something new, and it hasn't been tested, it hasn't been approved, and then you break things. And so we don't want to do that. Then finally, what type of physical security is in place? If your server is in a broom closet down the hall, and then there aren't any or very many technical solutions that can keep it safe, is that a good place for your servers? Drawing back from my experience, I worked in doing physical assessments at one point in time, and so that's one of the things we would try. Can we get into this location without being questioned? Can we walk into any of the rooms? Can we get access to any of the secure areas? And so these are things as you roll out security infrastructure, but the physical security is also, even though many times it's not be technical, whether you have to put some type of key lock on the door, cipher lock, whatever it may be, you want to make sure your assets are secure. Next, we have, and finally, the sixth fundamentally responsibility, and one of the most important tasks for security analysts is to report findings when they arise. First and foremost, identify and follow your agency's processes. Once you're aware of the agency requirements, you can then provide information and reporting that meets those requirements. Now, to support your reporting, what methods do you currently use to gather that information? And once again, this is just something that you can kind of think about in your head. But you want to make sure you have systems in place to make the reporting more efficient, right? You don't have someone taking down notes and then they need to go and type an email and then send it off to someone. You want to hopefully have one system that can track that, some type of even if it's a trouble ticket system that's maintained, that they can input that information and then it gets reported to other elements throughout the agency. And so another question to think about, does the source data have integrity? We talked about integrity checks earlier, hashing, things to keep that integrity from being, the data from being modified. Does the source data and the findings make sense when compared? Right. And then maybe there are anomalies that are not problematic or that are being handled in other ways. And so you want to be able to compare that data, what we refer to in the CDM world as the actual versus desired state, and then note any differences, right? And we have this actual state, this is what we're living in reality, and then the desired state is what we really want. So maybe that's our baseline. And sometimes those two don't go hand in hand. A lot of effort goes into data collection and analysis, but what you do with it afterwards is what's important. Right? Data analysis and reporting should result in some sort of actionable task or recommendation. At a minimum, you should be able to propose tentative solutions and be prepared to present the findings and make a recommendation. So we can collect all day long, and we check the box. Yes, we are data collecting, but is anybody reviewing those logs, right, that are being archived, or do you need to collect all that data? So those are things you need to be able to discuss and recognize and make sure you have strategies and plans in place so that you can go through and analyze that data. All right, next we're going to talk about Binding Operational Directive 22-01. And so this is one of the bots that was released in the last few years. And so on November 3rd, 2021, CISA issued Binding Operational Directive 22-01. Now, the intent being to reduce the risk of known exploited vulnerabilities, or what's referred to as KEVs, KEVs. This applies to both hardware and software found on federal information systems managed on agency premises or hosted by third party. Rather than have agencies focus on thousands of vulnerabilities that may never be used in a real-world attack, Bot 22-01 shifts the focus to those vulnerabilities that are active threats, right? So we streamline this process and CISOs streamline this process and realize, hey, there's too many vulnerabilities out in the wild. How can we make it easier for our security teams to be able to pinpoint and target a certain subset of vulnerabilities? And so that's why they came out with this bot. Now, this directive also established a CISA-managed catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities that carry significant risk to the federal enterprise. CISA adds the CAVs to the catalog when there's a clear action for the affected organization to take. And there are 3 thresholds for CAV catalog updates. Okay, and I'm going to go through those here. The first threshold, the vulnerability has an assigned common vulnerabilities and exposures, or CVE ID. The second one, there's a reliable evidence that the vulnerability has been actively exploited in the wild. And then the third one, there is a clear remediation action for the vulnerability, such as a vendor provided update. So they're not going to just release this catalog of vulnerabilities. They're going to say, hey, we're seeing things happen in the wild that are being, threat actors are exploiting it, and there's a remediation plan in place. And so there's things you can do to remediate this vulnerability. Now, what I have now, we haven't already, let's see here, post this link to the CAVs in the chat. Give me just one moment so you can take a look at those when you have a second. Because it might be helpful for those who haven't seen them. So that link is available in the chat. So that references and covers the CAV information that CISA has produced, and it's available for everyone to view. All right. The next bot I'm going to discuss is bot 23-01. And so this bot was released on October 4th of 2022. And otherwise known as improving asset visibility and vulnerability detection on federal networks. Its purpose is to make measurable progress toward enhancing visibility into agency assets and associated vulnerabilities. All right, and so this bot takes the concept of bot 2201 and patch management a step further. Bot 23-01 is about creating greater visibility by increasing the number of vulnerable scans happening on the networks. And so this directive focuses on 2 activities, 1 being asset discovery and 2 being vulnerability enumeration. Now, just so we're working from the same sheet of music, when we're talking about asset discovery, it's a building block of operational visibility, and it's defined as an activity through which an organization identifies what network addressable IP assets reside on their networks and identifies the associated IP addresses. So when we're talking about IP addresses in normal terms or layman terms, we're talking about hosts or endpoints. Asset discovery is non-intrusive and usually does not require special logical access privileges. Now, in regards to vulnerability enumeration, this is meant to identify and report suspected vulnerabilities on those assets. It detects host attributes, so anything related to like a operating system or OS, applications, open ports, things like that. And it attempts to identify outdated software versions, missing updates, and misconfigurations. All right. And so what I'm going to do here is post a link to this directive so you have that handy as well. So you can take a look at that. All right. I'm done speaking on the bot situation. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and pass it over to John to get us started on our second lab of the day.
All right, so let's take a look at lab number 2. Let's see here. Yes, okay, so responding to BOD 2301 data calls. And starts out with a scenario. So actually what you're going to be doing in this lab is identifying failed devices using the directives overview and BOD 2301 dashboards. So a little bit different. We're going to use a different space this time. Okay, so, but it starts out with a scenario. and it says the IMO has determined that some scan procedures are not being followed properly. You have been tasked to identify the number of contractor mobile medical devices that have failed a vol scan. Use the appropriate dashboard in the directive space to review your compliance with BOD 2301. All right, let me share out my screen here for just a second. And I want to just show you this real quick so that we're all in the same place. All right, this is from our last lab, so don't worry about that. Actually, I can show you now, since we're starting with lab number 2, let me go ahead and bring this over here. If I click the new link, notice it clears everything out, okay, which is what you want when you start fresh with your new lab. Okay, so but what I wanted to point out here is step number 1. It directs you to click this little A right up here in the upper left corner, and then click the directives dashboard. Okay, so make sure that you do that, because otherwise you'll be in the wrong place and nothing will look like it's supposed to. Okay, and then once you get here, double check your date, make sure that it's last 1 year. Okay. And as you bounce around between these dashboards, always check that, because it defaults to 30 days in a lot of cases. Some cases it will stay the same, but in most cases it will revert back to 30 days. So make sure that you set it to last 1 year. All right. Now this lab goes through several visualizations. I think on the overview, directives overview dashboard here, it talks about the different visualizations that you see. So, take a look at those. Then in step 14, it directs you to the BOD 2301 dashboard, and it talks about those visualizations. So it's really meant to get you familiar with these particular dashboards in the directives space. But then it's also going to ask you to create some filters, because remember, we're looking for failed vol scans, right? So it's going to ask you to create some filters. And so be sure to follow the step actions for that. And then when you get to the back, you have the knowledge check questions to answer. Okay, so let me get back to our slide deck here. All right, so let's put 20 minutes on the clock. I think it might take you a minute or two to get through this one. So let's put 20 minutes on the clock. We'll see you at 11:23 or so. All right, welcome back. Hopefully everybody finished up the lab. If not, I didn't mention this the last time, but if you don't finish, that's okay. The environment, the training environment that you're in will be available until 4 p.m. on Friday the 14th. So if you want to, you can jump back in. You'll log into it the same way you did this morning. Just put in your login, put in your multi-factor authentication, and then you'll be able to access the dashboard, and you can rework the labs, or you can click around and see what you can learn on your own. But take advantage of that, definitely, because it is available to you for the next few days after the class. So, all right, let me share out my screen here, and we will take a look at lab number 2. Okay. All right, so remember, we're looking for failed device scans, right? Or yes, devices that have failed the vol scan. So it starts out by showing you a little bit here about the directives dashboard, the overview dashboard. A lot of good information on here. I won't cover all of this in detail, but I do want to point out a couple of things, and I should have mentioned this in the last lab, but if you notice in each of these visualization panels, there's a title in the upper left corner. And there's also a little icon next to that title with an eye. And if you hover over that, it will tell you what that visualization is about. Okay, so that's really handy. If I come up here, for example, I can see, the directives ID, instances by directives ID, system boundary, this big wavy graph here. So it tells you what that's about. So if you're, curious about what that particular visualization is communicating, all you have to do is click the little eye, or actually hover over the little eye. But as I mentioned, lots of good information here, instances by CVE ID, instances by software. There's a trend line here of instances where you can kind of see how you're doing. Hopefully it's going down. Okay, and this is all mods and EDs for all organizations. Okay, so that's the overview dashboard. And then down here we have list of instances, vulnerabilities. Okay, so you can see the number of vulnerabilities. You can see the number of software that's out there, and also some of the HVA system boundaries that are out there. Okay. So again, a lot of good information. Now, next it wants us to about 2002. So we do that by clicking this link right here under Binding Operational Directives. And that brings us to, we should have some information in there. Let me refresh this here. Hopefully it will behave. All right. So there we go. That looks a little better. All right. So this is actually broken down into 4 different sections. We have host discovery. We have vulnerability enumeration. Then we have vulnerability detection signatures and hosts and scans. Okay, and once again, just like before, you have the little eye over the visualization, or next to the title to let you know what's going on with that visualization. Okay. All right. And if you run into a little error, something like this, like what you see here on the left, that's okay. Some of our data isn't loaded in some of the training data. So you may see blank things like this where it says no results found. That's okay. No issue there. Shouldn't affect the labs at all. But anyway, so vulnerability enumeration, you can kind of see what's going on there with the number of scans, missing vulnerability scans and so forth. Vulnerability detection signatures, okay, whether it's been seen within 24 hours or not within 24 hours, okay, average age, that sort of thing. Current signature updates by vendor, these are all clickable. I don't know if you were able to do that throughout your lab, but you can give those a click and basically what it does is it sets a filter so you can see specifically what's going on. Okay, next we have records of signature update dates. So basically step 21 through 25 are basically just showing you how to do that shortcut that we've been doing. Okay, so basically all we've done here is sort on a particular date field, which is right here. I'll show you how to do that. If we scroll over, some of these are pretty wide, so you may have to scroll over to the right to see everything. But here we have host observer NV last update date, okay, which is what you see in step 21. And if you notice, there's a drop-down arrow. There's a drop-down arrow next to several of the columns, so you can sort them. And in this case, I can remove the column, I can sort it, move it left, so on and so forth. In this case, we're going to sort it from old to new. And you'll notice as I do that, the dates change. Okay, so you can see it a little more clearly, or whatever you may be searching for might be easier to see. Okay. But again, 22 through 25 are basically just setting the filters. So, and then 25 directs you to delete the filters. So I won't go through those steps, but you can see how to do that. And with step 26, we're going to use the filters at the top of the page. Okay, so if you notice here, we have some preset, they're not preset filters, but they're different categories and different values that you can set fairly easily without having to come here and do an add filter. Okay. So with that, the first thing we're going to select is contractor for the agency. And we'll just scroll down, we'll find contractor. And as I set these, you'll notice that the information changes. So everything now that we've looked at is specific to contractor organization. Okay. So the next thing we're going to select is host category of mobile device. Okay. And that's right here at the top. So, and if you'll notice, now we're looking at all of the contractor mobile devices. All right. Next, we're going to say host type is medical device. And I think that's in our list here. Yep, medical device. Now, if you need something that isn't in the list, you can just type it in. But typically, if there's a value for it, it will be in the list. Okay. IP version we don't have, but we do want failed scans, right? That's what we're looking for. So we're going to do authentication outcome is fail. So now all of our information is reflective of contractors' mobile devices, mobile medical devices that have failed. All right. So, and then the next thing we have to do is we have to tell it that we want failed vulnerabilities. So we'll go up here to the query bar, and we're just going to type in device scan type. I'll just type in scan type. There we go. Device scan type equals, we'll use the semicolon, and then we can select vol out of the list here. Okay, and then we're going to say update. I know my screen is a little bit small, so this is scrunched up here, but it should say update. But it's the green button on the right, and we'll say update. And now if we scroll down, let's see what we have. I'm going to go to hosts and scans. All right. And we want to see the hosts and also the device scans, right? So what we want to do here now is we're going to sort the device scan date from old to new. Okay, so right here, the device scan date, device scan date, I should say, from old to new. Okay, and that puts the oldest one at the top. Okay, and then at that point, we've identified all of the contractor medical devices. Let me scroll down here a little bit so we can see the bottom. And if you notice here, there's a scroll bar. So if we want to see everything, we need to scroll to the right a little bit. Okay. And we've identified all the contractor mobile medical devices with a failed full scan. Okay. So again, just some simple filtering, can give you a lot of information from this particular dashboard. Okay. So with that, that takes us to the knowledge checks. So let's have a look here. Okay. So the first knowledge check. Okay, what is the number of failed vol scans for mobile medical devices in the contractor organization? Okay. All right. Where are we going to look? We're going to look right here under current records of device scans, right? And then we see that we have 9 documents. Okay, so we have 9 failed scans. Okay, so number 2 says how many mobile medical device scans were successful? All right, so right now we are filtering on failed. So let's go back up to the top. And authentication outcome, we're going to change that to successful. Now, there's a little trick here. You have to remember to uncheck fail. Okay, and this is true of all of these filters. So you have to uncheck what you have already selected. Okay. All right, so authentication outcome is success. And now if we go down, we can see that we have 4 successful items that have completed their vol scan. Okay. All right. Number 3. How many contractor smartphones have failed their vol scan? Okay, let's go back up to the top. We'll swap these around. Contractor smartphones. So we have host category of mobile device, host type. Notice these little erasers that pop up here. What you can do is click clear and then click smartphone. And that way the clear unchecks everything. Okay, so you don't mistakenly have something checked that you didn't mean to. Okay. We have to change authentication outcome back to fail because we want to know the failed smartphones. Okay. So we'll say fail. And then let's see, what else do we need to do here? I think that's it. So we have host type smartphone and then authentication outcome fail. So if we go down here to the bottom, we can see all of the smartphones, okay, in the contractor organization that have failed their vol scans. All right. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into the directives dashboard and some of the information that you can glean from what's listed there. So let me go ahead and get back to our slideshow. And all right, let's take a quick look here at, I think I'm in the right place here. Take a quick look here at aware scoring. All right, some aware scoring basics. So a little bit here about aware. We don't get into it in too much depth in this class. I do have a short video coming up here that gives you a great overview of what it is and what it does. So we'll take a look at that here in just a second. But aware, or agency-wide adaptive risk enumeration, is the methodology that's designed to enhance situational awareness for agencies, and it helps them to identify where their most important, significant, or worst issues are, so that they can better understand their current security posture and take appropriate action. It also helps to change the mindset from a compliance-based culture to a risk-based performance management culture. And this improved risk posture likely has some residual effects, such as revealing changes that are needed in governance policies, standards, procedures. So not everything is technical. As you deploy this new tool and begin using it, some of these things will need to be visited or revisited to make sure that they're still effective. Okay. So, and it's also meant to help agencies determine which vulnerabilities take precedence over others, and how to best utilize their cyber resources. If you have $10 worth of problems, but you only have $1 to spend, where do you spend that $1? You know, it's meant to help you to recognize what needs to be done first. Okay. And again, it's meant to promote situational awareness and encourage timely remediation of the worst vulnerabilities first. So fix the worst first is the mantra for AWARE. And then lastly, it also provides an equal baseline across all agencies. So this methodology that's used is used, you know, with the tiniest agency to the biggest agency. So everybody gets, you know, the same scoring and that kind of thing. All right, so but at the end of the day, we needed something that tells us fix this now, and the AWARE scoring algorithm does that for us. So with that said, let's take a look at the video, and let me bring that up. Give me just 1 second here. All right. And here we go.
With cyber risks so prevalent, how do federal civilian agencies identify which problems to address first to protect their systems and data? Understanding their level of risk enables agencies to determine the strength of their existing cybersecurity efforts and make the right decisions to prioritize resources and address problems to avoid future breaches. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, leads the national effort to defend critical infrastructure against today's cyber threats and the evolving risks of tomorrow. By working with partners across the federal government and in the private sector, one of CISA's main tools is the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, or CDM program. CDM sensors and dashboards provide automated monitoring for federal agencies to stay on top of their cyber risk. AWARE, agency-wide adaptive risk enumeration, is a key benefit of the program, providing participating agencies with a risk scoring system to help assess the size and scope of their vulnerabilities. AWARE gives each agency a view of its cyber risk, so it can prioritize actions and address the worst problems first. That view is defined as a score. A low-risk score reflects a smaller attack surface or vulnerability level. Once problems are identified, agencies can mitigate the vulnerabilities, patch issues, and then see their risk reduced to an acceptable range. AWARE considers the potential consequences of each threat, making it a valuable tool for security operations staff, program managers, and agency leadership to understand and address cyber risk. Scoring associated with specific vulnerabilities falls into distinct categories covering common cyber capabilities and functions. Currently, AWARE measures each agency's cybersecurity posture for internal use. Eventually, the CDM program will identify how agencies are managing risk across the federal government and complying with federal requirements. In time, this bird's-eye view will also show how agencies are addressing specific challenges, such as multi-factor authentication, and enable them to measure the relative success of their cybersecurity programs. AWARE is a key tool for the federal government to monitor risk, enhance cybersecurity, and gain knowledge through continuous assessment, mitigation, and results. Understanding your cybersecurity posture is enhanced by integrating AWARE into your cybersecurity operations. Visit the website for more information, cisa.gov/CDM.
Okay. All right, so as I mentioned, I think that's a great video to give you a quick overview of what it does, what it's meant to do, and how it does it. As I mentioned earlier, we have a vulnerabilities class that gets a little more into Aware. If you're interested in that, keep an eye out for that course on the schedule. All right, let's take a look at monitoring methodologies. Okay, so developing a work plan. Work planning methods are going to determine the activities that are going to be carried out for the term of a work cycle, whatever that cycle is for you and your agency. Okay, and it helps you to establish and keep a battle rhythm. A work plan is extremely helpful in navigating the activities of setting up your dashboard and maintaining ongoing risk management processes. Now, there's two primary types of work plans. One is project-based and the other is process-based. And a project-based plan might be used when setting up your dashboard or when you're working toward a specific end state. Address any agency-specific requirements, and as part of your project-based work plan, get used to using the dashboard to the extent that you can. Start by finding vulnerabilities that are causing your highest scores so you can remediate the worst contributors. And then, remember the mantra, fix the worst first, right? Now, a process-based plan could be used for ongoing activities, such as continuous monitoring procedures, routine outputs, that kind of thing. Process-based plans might use the agency dashboard to analyze reports on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. You can use this type of a plan to do things like trend analysis or identify if there's a process issue or a technology issue. Not everything is a technology issue. Okay. So having a work plan and establishing a routine helps to establish thresholds for you and your staff to know what issue to prioritize. Okay. So let me pose a couple of questions here. And you can answer me in the chat pod. What do you check while you're having your first cup of coffee? You come in, you get settled, you pour your first cup of coffee. What is the first thing that you check? All right, Matthew says Splunk and ACAS. Email. All right, I should have qualified the question, I guess. After email, what do you check? Update data areas. Okay. Anybody else? Tool dashboard, open tickets. Okay. See what's going on. Very good. So, all right. Thanks for that, guys. What you want to do is make sure that all the lights are blinking green and not red, and maybe your backup was successful. What's the status of your endpoints? What's the status of your vulnerabilities, your cyber awareness? Can't think of the name of it now that I brought it up, but we'll see it here in just a second on the checklist. So sorry about that. All right. So what do you think then would be some important weekly checks or tasks that you would need to do? Think in terms of a system security analyst, what would be some important weekly checks? Review scan reports, okay. SIEM tool, dashboards, hardware updates, okay. Even software updates, all right. Vulnerability reports, okay. Very good. Okay, all great answers. Again, there's no wrong answer here. So keep up the good work on that. So thanks for that. Heavy on the reports. Okay. Alerts. All right. Now, let me ask you this question, and you can give me a thumbs up for this one. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you have a daily routine or checklist that you follow? All right. Thumbs up. Excellent. Okay. So, wow, just about everybody. So excellent. So what I want to show you here is, and it's in the supplemental documents section of the CBLE, you're going to find a recommended system security checklist. And this is a checklist that you can use as a template for your daily and weekly and monthly monitoring activities. So this tool was extensively reviewed by the CDM PMO, and it's designed to give you a starting point in developing your own detailed checklist specific to your operations. So since most of you have a checklist already, take a look at this and pull out whatever it is that may be of use to you. Okay, there's a lot of good references in here. And with that said, I'm going to jump out and show you what that looks like. So I'll share out my screen real quick here, and we'll just take a quick look. If I can find where to go here. Okay, so it looks something like this. We have the title page here. Scroll down, we have the table of contents. We have all the legalese here. And then, oh, sorry about that. Then we have a table here with some items that might be useful from a training standpoint for your security analyst or you know, whoever might be doing this position. So, you know, again, it's not for everybody. Not everything will fit to your agency, but just take a look. You know, use what you will. And it's, you know, if nothing else, it's meant to, you know, provoke some thought and to get you thinking about what might be necessary or useful for your analysts to know. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the tasks here. So we have a daily task, and you can see this here on the left. Then we have the task itself, which is listed here on the left, and then the dashboard capability. If there is a capability in the dashboard, it's noted. Now, not everything has a dashboard capability, admittedly. Okay, but for those that do, you know, try to use it to the extent that you can. We've listed the layer A tools that we are aware of for that particular task. Okay, there's a little place for notes if you have a note, and then the guidance source document. Lots of NIST SP references here. There's a couple of cybersecurity advisories. That's what I couldn't think of earlier. You know, checking your advisories. And then a date that you complete it. So that's kind of how it's used. But we have the daily tasks. Okay, we have the weekly tasks, which are, you know, maybe it's audit log reviews or, you know, backup data, that kind of thing, incident response reporting. Okay, monthly tasks that are listed here. Okay, and then quarterly tasks, annual tasks, things like training. Okay, and then as required. And while this kind of falls at the bottom, it's really kind of one of the most important ones because, you know, I think Adrian mentioned this earlier in the presentation this morning. You know, things are constantly changing. Okay, so you know, maybe you get a whole new set of equipment in or something, you know, then that's going to require you to update your documentation probably. You know, so just as an example. You know, be cognizant of the as required piece, okay? All right. That's all I wanted to show you on that. So be sure it's in the supplemental documents of the CVLE. So make sure that you take a look and take that with you today. All right, and with all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian. He's going to get you started on lab number 3. So Adrian, over to you.
Thank you, John. And so as John mentioned, we're going to get started on lab number 3. This one's going to focus on identifying a specific vulnerability within a system boundary. So you have the chance to review and take a look at the hardware assets details dashboard for some of the more specific information related to a host, and then identify the vulnerabilities that are on that host. And so we're going to give you 15 minutes to complete this third lab. And much like John's done in the past, the previous 2 labs, after the 15 minutes is up, I'll come back in and we'll debrief some of the key steps in the lab, but focus mostly on the knowledge checks. So we can just get a timer.
Hey, Adrian, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
All right, that better.
Yes, sir.
Unmuting that usually helps. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look at lab number 3. And in this lab, we have a scenario, and so I'll quickly read that scenario, just kind of give us some kind of context of what we're looking for in the inventory. And so a patch was applied to virtual machines on System Boundary 5 to eliminate an Adobe vulnerability on workstations. The patch eliminates the CVE ID CVE-2021-27852. However, patching was only partially successful. Your supervisor has asked that you identify the remaining machines with this vulnerability and determine why the patch could not be applied. All right, so we've been tasked. And so let's get set up. So with this lab, they want us to start out by going to the Discover tool, which I'm currently at, which we've been using throughout the course. I don't have anything in my search criteria, so I don't need to hit new to create a new search, so not a worry there. But if you've been performing searches, you may have to click the new to refresh your search. Within the Discover tool, we're going to select the data view CDM underscore Volin underscore current. So click the drop down. Let that populate. Now we need to add fields, so we can see the values associated with those fields. First one is system underscore boundary.id. So it's under my popular field section. So I'm going to click the plus sign here. Next, we need vulnerability underscore finding.cve.id. And I don't see that one list. Oh, there it is. 2 host.is underscore virtual, because we're looking for virtual machines. That one there. I don't see that one, so I'm going to search for it. And you can see it populates once I search for it in my search fields box. Next is host.type. Host.id. And that one is available for me. And then lastly, vulnerability underscore finding dot affected underscore software dot CPE. see. I can do this, and that works. I'm going to add that one. All right. We've now added the fields that were needed based upon the report that they want us to generate. If you're following along, the next step was for us to go into the Add Filter section. So we're going to click this blue plus sign here. It's going to ask you to select a field, and in this case, we want system_boundary.id. For the operator, we're going to select is. And for the value, we want it to equal to SB-05, and that's based upon the scenario. Once you have that, just go ahead and click Add Filter. Now, if you recall from earlier, when I first loaded the data view, there was over, I think, 78,000 documents within the table. Now you can see by just applying that filter for SB-05, we're now down to just under 5,500 hits. Next, what we want to do, and you can actually, one thing I think is cool about the dashboard is you can go about this many different ways. We're showing you one way that we can all hopefully follow the same steps, and if there's an issue, we can address it then. But I could have very easily gone into the document table and filtered by SB-05 as well. Same thing on this next step. We're going to actually go in, and in the query bar, just to show you another way to do this, we're going to type host.type equal to something. And so in this case, we want endpoint virtual. As you can see, obviously, once you come to the syntax, it shows you what options are available from that drop down. And so it has to be one of these. We're going to click virtual. And I think for this case, we're going to actually apply multiple filter here. So we're going to do a combined filter and say, and vulnerability finding. I got to type some more. Okay. .cve.id, and we want that to equal to the CVE they provided in the scenario. And so in this case, as you can see here, -27852, and populate that. Now, once we have that, since we're just doing a combined filter, a multi-filter, that's going to work for this exercise of this lab. I'm going to go ahead and click Update. And as you can see, now we're down to 1 based upon all those filters that meet those requirements. So the system is in SB-05. It has the CVE identified. It is virtual as well, and it shows you a host ID. Everybody's tracking that. Now, if we need to get more granular details regarding that host, and John mentioned this earlier, there's some of these that may be highlighted in blue versus the black text. That lets you know it's a hyperlink to a dashboard where you can get more details regarding that asset. And so in this case, it's host-1105. So if I click on that, now if you notice, some of the scores here show 0. And since we're using a certain time frame within this environment, we want to make sure they say last 1 year. All right, and so if you didn't notice now, the dashboard that we're currently in is the hardware asset details dashboard. And so it provides you details regarding the hardware asset that we've clicked on in the previous dashboard or in the Discover tool. And you can see with the aware scores, you can see the tolerance adjusted aware score, if there's a CSM related subscore. So this is all in relation to aware. Remember from the video. Now, if we look in the hardware asset details panel, it shows you the host ID, the actual name of the host name, as you can see here. So it has the FQDN, or fully qualified domain name. Is it a high value asset? And so in this case, it's false. Current status, so it's quarantined currently right now. Is it managed? Is it authorized? A lot of information. You have some other information. If you go to identifiers panel, it shows you the organization ID, system boundary, when it was assigned, what facility it's in. So some of the organizational structure of that device. So pretty quick and somewhat easy, I guess, to try to get the information in this case for this device. One of the other things, you have a manager ID, so we could then tie that manager ID to a user and try to figure out, hey, what's going on with this device. All right, so that pretty much sums up that lab number 3. And as we had in previous labs, we have some knowledge checks, and so we'll take a quick look at those now. And so the first question says, review the visualizations on the hardware asset details dashboard. Where would you find the organization ID associated with this host? Well, I've kind of walked you through that piece already, but if you look in the screen, you can see under identifiers, you can see the organization ID is FEMA. So it would be in the identifiers panel. Question number 2, or knowledge check number 2. Where would you find the configuration benchmark for this host? Well, if I just scroll up, under system details, you can see you have information regarding the architecture, so the type of platform it is, the make of the system. In this case, it's a Dell. I know some of the information because it is, being generated, just to populate some of the fields. It's you can see there's some anomalies with the data, but this one that says it's the OS is Ubuntu. But when you look at the configuration benchmark, it says it's using the sys benchmark. So that would be the answer for number 2. So actually the answer is system details is the actual answer. So system details panel, and you can see that the benchmark being used is sys. All right, question number 3. Use the back button to return to the report in the Discover tool. What is the common name for the affected software? All right, so let's click this back button in your browser here. And you may have to do it twice. Wait until it takes you back to the Discover tool. And so we just need to find the column or field that identifies the common name for the affected software. Now, based on what we have, I'm going to modify some of the sizing of the columns here. And if we scroll all the way over, you can see that the vulnerability underscore finding dot affected underscore software dot CPEs lets us know what type of software, the common name for the software. And so in this case, it's Adobe Acrobat 5. Cool. So that concludes lab number 5. Once again, hopefully everyone was able to work through that one and just see how you can actually devise different types of filters to get the results of the report that you need based upon the task. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we're going to move right into lab number 4, which is our final lab of the day. We're going to put 15 minutes back on the clock. And once again, once we get through the 15 minutes, I'll come back on and debrief the lab. All right, everyone. Well, we're going to go ahead and get into the 4th and final lab for today. Made sure to unmute my mic this time. Let me share my screen. All right, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. If not, it should be pulling up here shortly. All right, so in this final lab of the day, we do have another scenario. And so just much like the last one, I'll read that just so we can make sure we're searching down the right path. It says your supervisor has tasked you to identify any devices that may have the SolarWinds Orion products installed on them so you can start the remediation process. Identify which devices in the CISA organization have SolarWinds Orion products installed and determine what software versions are being used. All right. So we're going to continue on within the Discover tool. So I'm already there. What I do need to do, so in this case, I have a search currently still running, our report still up. So I'm just going to go ahead and click New. So that removes any filters that may have been applied. And this time, instead of being in the CDM Volume Current data view, I'm actually going to go into the CDM SWAM Current. So I'll give that just a few moments to populate. You can see there's just over 96,000, just under 97,000 hits within that data view. Now, we need to go through the process of adding the fields, which will help us quickly identify some of the attributes or values that we need. And so the first one we need is software underscore finding dot software dot vendor. I'm going to move this over some here. So we have that one. Product, it's another one. And then version. These are all related to the software. So now I need an organization ID. And that's into my popular field. So we're going to add that one. Host.id. That one's there as well. Host.category. And then finally, system underscore boundary.id. All right, so I got to find that one. All right, so we've added those fields to our document table. We're going to go back up to the top here and we're going to add a filter. And the first filter we want to add is going to be based upon the host category. Oh, sorry. There we go. Add filter, host.category, operator is, because we want an exact match. And then from the drop down, we're going to select the value of networking device. So within there, we're going to add that filter. We'll click add filter. Next, we want to add a filter for the organization.id, and we want it to equal to CISA. Now, they're in the steps, they're saying you can go back through and add a filter. This time, I'm going to deviate from that. I'm just going to go ahead and under the organization.id column or field, I'm going to find CISA and just click the plus sign next to it. All right, so we have two filters being applied. You can see that we've gone from just over 96,000 to 3,000 hits. And within the query bar, which is right here, I'm going to paste this one. You're more than welcome to type it, but I'm going to paste it from the document here that I have available for me. And I'll talk through this one. So what we're looking for is we're going to do is software underscore finding dot software dot vendor. The vendor we want to be an exact match with is SolarWinds. And so it's a combined or multiple filter. And software underscore finding dot software dot product of Orion. Now in this one you can see there's variations, right? We're saying we're looking for an exact match of SolarWinds, but the Orion, we just want it somewhere within the product. It could be Orion 1, 2, 3, whatever. That's not necessarily, and we don't need an exact match there, but it has to have some variation of Orion in that product name. And so that's why we have the asterisk on either side for the product. And then lastly, wow, this one's got 3 filters included, or queries included within this one filter here. So the last one would be software underscore finding dot software dot version equal to asterisk. So once again, we're looking for any software version. All right, so hopefully everyone was able to complete that piece of it. Once we have it, we're going to go ahead and click update. And if I didn't mess up anything, we should see some results. All right, I'm going to maximize some of these here. So that column version, so you can see version, product, so you can see product, and obviously this one here is the product. I'm sorry, not product, but the vendor, and it's SolarWinds. So based upon the requirement, we've been able to meet that requirement by creating this quick filter or query. All right. Now from here, and I think John went through one of these earlier, but you could save this report. So if I click on save, title it, and then go ahead and save it, you would be able to say, I'm not going to save it, but you could then go ahead and save it and it'd be available for you to share with other coworkers, right? And so save it. Well, I'll go ahead and save it just so we can fill this out. And from here, you could actually do, the get links. You have the snapshot or saved object. So the difference, obviously, being a snapshot is just a moment in time. Saved object is you're going to save all the objects, so it continues to get updated. Versus the snapshots, they do not. You can do a short URL, copy the link, and then the other option is you could do the CSV reports. All right. So that's it. That's pretty much it for that lab. Hopefully everyone was able to work through that without any issues, but if you did have questions or concerns, please let us know. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the knowledge checks. So there are, I think, 3 questions. So the first one, how many networking devices have SolarWinds products installed across all system boundaries? All right. So let me get out of this. So we don't have a filter for the system boundary, so we're currently already reporting on this. So all we need to do is look at the number of hits. So in this case, there's 9. Excuse me. Now let's check number 2. Modify your filters and determine how many other I/O devices in system boundary 4 have SolarWinds products installed in the CISA organization. All right, so we got to edit the host category. If I go up here to my filter that's currently available, click on the host that category, edit that filter. Instead of networking device, I want to click the drop down and click or select other I/O device. Update that filter. And then now we need to actually filter this time on the system boundary. And so in this case, I could go back up here and create a new add filter, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into the document table, and for this last column here, that field is system boundary ID. And I'm just going to look and see if I see SB-04. And so thankfully in this case, it's at the top of the list. I'm going to go ahead and just click the plus sign there. You can see it populates it. Now, we don't need to do anything for CISA or any of the SolarWinds related information. So in this case, based upon that filter, that modified filter, there's 2 documents that are related to that. All right. Now let's check question number 3. Of the networking devices across all CISA system boundaries that have SolarWinds products installed, how many are version 2020.2 or higher? All right, so what we need to do is go back and edit the host category. Go back to networking device. So we're going to modify this filter or edit the filter. Go to host category is, click the drop down for the type, And we're going to click on networking device, update that filter. We're going to remove the system boundary filter that we have. So we're just going to click the X here next to that boundary filter. And we're just going to modify what we have in the query bar. Right now we have the vendor SolarWinds, product Orion, and the software version. We're looking for any version. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to just type in here 2020.2. And we might need to star at the end, the asterisk for the versioning. And we're going to go ahead and click update. And as we can see, we now have 5 assets that are in relation to that. So I use this star because, as you can see here, it included anything after 2020.2, right? So you have a .1 included in there as well because I used the star after the version that we're looking for. So anything beyond that will be included in those results versus if I did, let's see if it, as you can see the difference. I also could have, well, I guess we're looking for .2, so I can't do a 2020 star because that would give me .1s if there are any versions of that. But hopefully that made sense for everybody on why we're using the star at the end. All right. That concludes lab number 4. We're going to go stop sharing. All right. And I see that someone mentioned in the chat that the CVLE will be available until Friday at 4 p.m. So please make sure you take use of that, even if it's just to look around and go back into the dashboard and kind of just see what other options may be available for you. Get familiar with it because that's the goal. Even beyond our labs, kind of get you, like I said, get more familiar with the dashboard. All right, we're going to go ahead and continue on. And the next section we're going to talk about is addressing security issues. So first, you want to start with your critical systems when you're trying to find security issues, right? The most important systems. And so how does your system support the mission? It's important to know what the current protections are that are in place and to continually monitor those security controls to ensure that they remain effective. Because it goes back to that continuous monitoring, right? Technology evolves, so controls need to evolve as well. So that type of mindset. And so it's likely that you already have specific tasks associated with monitoring your mission critical systems, and that these tasks are designed to identify problems. At least we hope so. Continuous monitoring should keep your current system vulnerabilities on your radar. When I worked in a NOC and also in a SOC, you'd have these monitoring systems. That would be the first thing leadership wanted to see. Hey, do we have some type of big, beautiful monitors, a watch room, so to speak, right? And this is what you see on the TV shows. There's people at desk and they have all these screens everywhere so they can monitor what's going on and pinpoint problems on the network or across the world. And so that's usually step one. But in addition to standard vulnerabilities, you want to also be able to, respond to activity alerts or emergency directives. We talked about bots today. You want to have some kind of way to sync up not only your what we know that's at the forefront and what you're doing from a daily activities, but bots, which may not be as frequently released, so to speak. Right? You're not going to have a bot every day, but they're very important. And so when those directives come, you need to be aware and have some type of alerting system where that message gets out to the staff. And so they usually, like I said, they don't come every day, so they require immediate attention and action. And so if you have effective systems, they can quickly be identified using that dashboard. And so in today's case, we use the CDM dashboard and how it can be helpful. The dashboard can also be used for hardware and software management and to research and fix easy discrepancies. Fixing the easy stuff can have an immediate impact on your aware scores and the overall health of your system. So in this case, we're talking about risk, right? You see scores going down, that means good in many cases, right? And so that's where you can kind of visualize something happening. We're always a part, and this is the thing I teach people that I work with, we want to see action, right? We want to, there was times that I would work within a staff, and you seem like you were just continually working on tickets, but you wouldn't see the overall purpose. Like, are we putting a dent on anything? If I got thousands of tickets being coming across my screen, or if I'm checking the ticketing system, I want to see some type of action. And so usually on Fridays we would brief, hey, when we started the week, we had 5,000 tickets. I'm just throwing a number out there, but now we're down to 2,000. So we did more than half. So you should be proud of yourself. And so the same thing with this, the Where Scores provides you that visual where you can say, okay, we were at 1,000 at the beginning of the week. Now at the end of the week, we've done an update. Now we're at 600. So we're putting a dent in it. The other piece of this is management of user accounts, credentials, and privileges is another foundational part of your system. You want to use the dashboard to identify who is on your system and whether they are correctly permissioned. The dashboard is also a good source of information regarding training, whether it's completed or if it is still applicable, right? And so it's that behavior piece of it. I'm pretty sure we've all had to do some type of phishing training, yearly IA training to keep our accounts active. And so this provides you that single situational awareness of all the users within your organizations and if they're up to date or when they will be need the reoccurring training. So in short, you want to stay on top of the easy stuff and don't let a small issue become a big issue. On this slide is a recommended list based on best practices. And so some of these bullets may fall within the recommended checks and reviews you already have in place. And if they do, great, you're on the right path. And so your agency may have specific requirements or issues that they want to emphasize in addition to routine activities. And so there may be some type of particular vulnerabilities that require waivers or circumstances that will need to be reported more frequently. And so all this goes into the process for mitigating discrepancies. So all in all, you want to monitor and respond to discrepancies when they arise, properly configure endpoints, right? You don't want misconfigurations to hinder you. Establish a battle rhythm and use the dashboard to identify the worst problems first and then respond accordingly. Well, guess what, everyone? We've reached the point in today's training where we come to the conclusion. And so hopefully everyone enjoyed today's course. But before we go, I do have a few things that we want to talk about. The first being the evolution of the CDM dashboard. And so many times you may think, what is the road ahead and what does that look like? And this roadmap illustrates the progress of the dashboard throughout the federal enterprise. Now, even though we've accomplished a lot, I've been through the days of the previous legacy dashboard up into this point, and there's been a lot that's been accomplished. But with everything, there's still a lot to come in terms of moving the needle to get us to a threat-based response posture. The dashboard is evolving to a more service-based delivery model versus one-size-fits-all. And the most notable thing is that the dashboard is going to continue to evolve with additional and improved capabilities and delivery models. Some of the takeaways from today. You see them on the screen. I'm not going to really necessarily go through each one of these. You have a great start with the checklist that we provided today, and so basically take advantage of that. Know and monitor the actual versus desired state of your systems. We mentioned that the foundation of information security is AIC. And that's availability, integrity, and confidentiality. And then maintaining the desired state according to your agency's policies is the best way to ensure that. You want to review your agency processes regarding system discrepancies and incidents. You want to make sure they know the difference between an event versus an incident and who they report that to. Have a process for reporting those discrepancies, as I mentioned, and when identified, and then make recommendations for mitigation. You want to have a work plan in place to help you with tasks and processes. And lastly, use the dashboard to support these activities to the maximum extent. All right. Now, what I'm going to do now is go ahead and hand it off to John to tell us more about some training opportunities that are available and upcoming.
All right, thank you, Adrian. I know we're right up on time here, so I will be as quick as I can. just a couple of things here to note. We have some upcoming CDM courses that are available for registration, so take a look at those when you get a chance. We also have some microlearn videos, some new things out there that have just been posted, as well as some items that relate to our course today. So, and those are located on FedVTE. So be sure and take a look at those when you get a chance. Now, let me just get a quick thumbs up here. How many of you feel a little better about the dashboard than you did a few hours ago? All right. I love the thumbs up, so I appreciate that. So I feel like we've kind of accomplished our mission then. You know, as Adrian said, you know, take advantage of the dashboard. It's going to be available until Friday at 4 p.m. So jump back in, you know, work out your labs again if you need to. Click around, see what you can learn, but definitely take advantage of that resource. We also offer training courses. If you click the, if you take the slides with you, these links that you see in the slides are clickable. So if you click on CDM training and resources, that is where you will go to register for upcoming courses. There's a list that are that's posted there. And that list gets updated I think it's every couple of weeks. So you'll want to visit that fairly often and see what's coming up on the schedule for you to register for. Now, let me see a thumbs up. How many of you have a FedVTE account? Just a quick thumbs up if you have a FedVTE account. Okay, not too many. That's all right. If you don't have an account, I would encourage you to sign up for one. It's very easy to do. If you just click on the request account link there, it will take you right to the place where you need to, I think it's you enter some basic information, your name and your email and your agency. I think you have to have a .gov email address, but it's very easy to sign up for. But you definitely want to do that because there's a lot of good CDM resources on there to take a look at. So with that, let me go. I want to share one more thing with you. Which is the CDM Dashboard Knowledge Base. There's a lot of good information on this as well. And all you need to do to request access is send an email to the email that you see there, cdm.training@CISA, and request access. Your agency CDM POC can also assist with that. In fact, I might recommend that you start there first and then email us if you need access. But either way, it's a great resource for you. So take a look at that when you get a chance. All right, points of contact. Let's see here. Cyber Insights at CISA.dhs.gov is all things training. So if you have any questions about training or concerns, or you need help with something, help with registration, please let us know. Just send us an email at that address and someone will respond quickly. Okay, CDM training team lead is Joseph Bukovac. He introduced us this morning. He's always interested in your feedback, and you know, so if you have any comments or questions or whatever, you can email him directly at the email you see there. Program office questions, CDM program office. We have an email for those folks as well if you have basic CDM questions. And then, of course, the access to FedVTE and the knowledge base are listed here as well. So, all right, with that, I know I went pretty quickly there, but I wanted to take a moment and thank you for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe to give us a few parting words. So, Joe, over to you.
Oh, great. Thanks, John. And thanks again, everyone. And one additional thing is I put in the chat for the link for the YouTube videos that we now have. So you can check those out at your leisure. But I want to thank everyone for attending and participating in this system security analyst course. and hopefully you got a lot out of it. And also want to thank John and Adrian, who did another fantastic job presenting the material to you and going over the labs. And just like both John and Adrian have said about the course feedback. So the course feedback, please do that so you can get your certificate. So that is in the environment, and you have 72 hours to complete it, and then you'll be able to download your course certificate. And it's really important that you provide your feedback, because we use that as we develop our courses. In fact, just FYI, you want to mark down September 12th. That is our expected debut of our newest course, which is going to be HVA tracking. And so we take a lot of your feedback, and so does the CDM PMO as they develop new capabilities for the dashboard. And I know we're running late, so I just want to wrap it up, and that is really it. And I want to thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you at training events in the future. And if you're local to the Washington, D.C. area, please consider our in-person courses, and we will have a whole week of training the week of July 22nd, I believe it is. So register, and maybe we'll see you in person. Thanks again, and have a great day.